I want to introduce our panelists, our hosts today. My name is Jessica Rogers. I am the Director of National Sales here at SI&A. We have with us David Ostash. He is the Superintendent of Sierra Sands Unified School District out in Kern County in Southern California. And we have with us Tony Wold, recently retired CBO, and now we have the privilege of having him working with SI&A as our CBO in residence. And I got to tell you, it's been such a pleasure to have him with us. So welcome to both of you, and thanks for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Absolutely.
So today we're here to talk about what CBOs can do to support student achievement and improving student outcomes. And as CBOs, as folks in the finance area, we play a really important role in allocating resources to make sure that we can teach our kids. Well, today we want to kind of challenge your thinking and give you something to take back to your district to really look at focusing on student achievement differently. And that's going to be through the lens of attendance. And a lot of you may not know this, but 40 plus years of research has shown that attendance is oftentimes the #1 predictor of student outcomes. Things such as reading literacy in the early grades, course failures in high school, graduation rate, dropout rates, GPA. Attendance is more of an indicator than the other things that we might think would be, such as socioeconomic status or anything like that. So think about that and remember this throughout our conversation today, because this is the lens that we're looking at this through. And we're going to be referencing some data today through our partnership with Dave at Sierra Sands Unified. And Dave in his district is a partner with SI&A's program called the Achievement Initiative, which is an attendance management system to help districts laser focus on attendance. So we will dive more into that. But I did want to let you know that that's the data that we're referencing today. So today, we really want to make sure that everybody walks away with some of these outcomes. We're going to talk about the ADA funding formula in California specifically, and that's where Dave's district is located, but the changes in funding that we're seeing. We're also going to show and look at attendance trends and how things are looking right now, give you some attendance data and some things to think about to bring back to your district and how you should look at attendance. We're going to talk about some strategies that have really worked for others that you can do at your district, and wrap up with how the CBO can support those efforts. So those are our main takeaways for the day. I'm going to have Tony kick it off. Go ahead.
So by now, most of you have worked through the new 3-year formula. The legislature really understood that there were multiple things hitting school districts at the same time. We had a trend of declining enrollment. We had students that did not attend school during the pandemic, and we also had lower ADA. So the move was to move to a 3-year funding formula. And then there was a little added bonus this year for 21-22 only, where they're going to provide a proxy ADA. So what we tried to do here is put these in colors so you can get an idea for most districts. This is how you're funded this year and then the next 2 years. For this year, most districts are being funded by taking the 3 years, 19-20 twice, which is in blue, and then your proxy 21-22. And the way you get the proxy ADA is you take your traditional percentage before the pandemic, for many districts, 93, 94, 95%. You divide that number by what your ADA percentage was in 21-22. Many districts, it was 89, 90%. That created a factor between 100 to 109%. That was then multiplied by each of your grade span ADAs to give you the proxy. To make it make a little more sense, if we go to the next slide, we took an example district. This is not Sierra Sands, but this is just a sample district. Pre-pandemic, their enrollment was 11,412. Their ADA was 10,813, so 94.76% ADA. Last year, that same district, their enrollment had dropped over 2 years by 620 to 10,792. The ADA, however, due to quarantines and due to many of the factors that we're all facing, dropped to 87.5%. So had there not been that proxy ADA, that district would have gotten funded as one of the 3 years at 9,452 ADA. But with the formula that we talked about, what ends up happening is they take that 94.76 divided by 87. That creates a quotient of 108%. You see that in yellow down below. And so what that meant is that they take that 108% and times it by the 9,452. And so they're getting funded for that year at 10,226. So that district had actual enrollment of 10,700, but their funding is going to be the 10,800 twice, the 10,200 once, divide by 3. They're getting funded for 10,618 this year. Next year, however, one of those 10,813s is going to drop. And whatever happens in the current year is going to be 1/3 of the formula. So it's really important to understand that each year now lasts in your funding formula for 3 years. And this district had dropped 7% in ADA. That happened in 2 years. Habits changed. It's very unlikely that you're going to change habits back immediately to get back to 94% in 1 year. So that's another factor that you have to really be planning on. And I don't know if you have felt the same way, Dave?
Sorry, just putting on mute. So good to see everyone. Just a little bit of background information as we move forward. We're going to open the kimono and check out the data for Sierra Sands. Very happy to do it. Very happy to share. You'll see in a few slides how our data has reflected what I think probably most of you in this webinar are experiencing yourself, which is a decreased ADA. I want to mention that Sierra Sands Unified has about 5,200 students. We're a unified school district, TK through 12. We are in the city of Ridgecrest, which is kind of we're in the Mojave Desert, and we're kind of in the far northeast reaches of the Southern California area, kind of remote. But I do think our district of 5,200 students is a very average reflection of many of the districts around the state. And I wanted to comment what Tony is saying is really important, because I think there's that moral imperative that attendance, the most important part of attendance is learning, right? For the predictors that Jessica talked about. But I'm sure that most of the people on this webinar also hold a very high level of responsibility for the fiduciary aspect, the business aspect. And I just wanted to highlight that as my team and I look at this sort of soft landing, where you have this 3-year average, this proxy ADA that really helps bolster your calculation, I think we need to recognize that the opposite is true too. So as we move forward, we have a soft landing, but if we have some down years, we're now going to take more time to get back up to an ADA that we might have been more accustomed to in the past. So the point is, soft landing now, but could present some budget projection difficulties for us as we look at the averaging aspect. So we'll talk a little bit more about it in future slides, but as we look at budget projections, as districts are sitting down at the collective bargaining table right now and in the coming weeks and months, dealing with demands for 10 and 12 and 15% on schedule raises and such, we just need to look really carefully and really incorporate a projection for ADA like we've never done before. We're just really looking at minimum a 3-year projection, but possibly a 5-year projection, taking into consideration how this formula works, and maybe looking kind of conservatively about what the attendance may actually play out to be in the coming years, so that you don't make any significant mistakes at the collective bargaining table in 2022.
And I think that's a great point. That's why I really recommend CBOs and superintendents, as you're looking at that data, create that color-coded chart so that your community understands how long each number is going to last and tell your stakeholders what the trends are early so they can start projecting out what the next 2 years would look like.
Absolutely. And I think that's like a perfect segue into a poll that we want to put out to the attendees. We would love to know, what is your district projecting for your ADA or attendance rate increase? So some districts may have projected a 1%, a 3%, a 5% increase. What is your LEA projecting this year? What are your goals? So we'll give you an opportunity to answer the poll, and then we'll take that info and continue.
So while everyone's answered, go ahead and move to the next slide, and I'll kind of transition us forward a little bit.
Sure.
There's been a lot of change in leadership in many districts, and most everyone, as we've come out this year, are trying to do everything we can to get back to a sense of normalcy. After the last 3.5 years of change, it really is trying to get a focus. And Matt Wayne is the new superintendent in San Francisco Unified. When they did an interview with him about his priorities, it was very interesting what he came out to do and focus on. It's really 3 things. He said the first thing, there needs to be time and space for healing. We need to come back together as a community. We've all been through something significant. It's not going to just go away. And so we need to be there for each other. The space and grace needs to continue. More so, he then said, we've got to refocus ourselves back on teaching and learning. There's been so much talk about COVID and politics and all the other things that were necessary for safety. But now we've got to get our focus back to the basic building blocks, the blocking and tackling of teaching and learning. And then finally, he did talk about declining enrollment. We need to make sure that we're reconnecting our communities back to the school settings, that schools are a safe place to come, that this is where you want to be, that we are going to be focused on teaching and learning. So I think as we really look at the narrative there, the last couple of years have been challenging. For those of us that sat in cabinet and worked with boards of education, many of the meetings were very focused on structures, on safety protocols, on all those things that were essential. But we went into this business to ensure that students are achieving. And so that needs to be our focus. And as we talk about attendance, it is the gateway to student achievement, but it's also the first line of defense against lost learning.
Absolutely. I'd love to throw up another poll just to get an idea of what your district's trends look like when it comes to enrollment. Are you seeing increasing enrollment, declining enrollment, or are you relatively flat? And we're going to throw up a poll. Should see it here in a second to go ahead and answer that as well. But let's also continue in the conversation as you answer that question, because we really that focus on teaching and learning, I think, is really important, because when we look at the impact that this has had on our students, it is going to take more than just a year to recover. If you think about it, this year's 3rd grade students haven't had a normal year. Every year of their K-12 education has been disrupted. And so that means there is some learning that needs to be recovered for those students. 3rd grade is like the last year for you to really learn how to read, to really help you be successful, in the rest of your education. But it also means habits haven't been formed. The habits you learn in those early grades are very important to help you be successful. So we really have to make the focus on teaching and learning for the sake of our students. 9th graders haven't had a normal year since 5th grade. They've missed all those, their entire middle school years were disrupted. So just very important to pay attention to this. So Dave, talk about your district and your focus on attendance and kind of what this year is looking like for you and what you've seen so far.
Thanks, Jessica. Yeah, so we more recently signed on to utilize the A2A module or function with SI&A, which has really been transformative for us because really in the past, I think we've done a good job of focusing on attendance. We had processes in place from notices that would go out for tardies or attendance all the way to SARB. But we really did not have a real unified or coordinated effect. So now we have as a standing agenda item for our elementary principal meetings, our secondary principal meetings, and even in our management team meetings, we have standing agenda items to talk about attendance and how our processes are working for us. We've had a long-standing 94-95% attendance rate, but we saw that drop. And one of the things that I want to highlight is kind of a follow-on comment to my first remark about projections. We were really gratified. I was really gratified to see in the first couple weeks of school, we had really good attendance. We had about a 94% attendance rate. And then something that I couldn't have anticipated, at least not specifically, but we're all anticipating staffing shortages. We have a transportation department in our district that we still utilize for both special education bus routes and general education bus routes. And as far as I've been in the district for 27 years now. This is my 4th year as superintendent, but I've been in the district my whole adult life, and I've never seen this happen. But we had to suspend our general education bus routes the last 2.5 weeks due to COVID impact and other staffing impacts in our transportation department. And instead of having 12 bus drivers, we had 5 or 6 bus drivers on any given day. So we had to only drive our special education routes and suspend the general education routes. The great news is right before this webinar started, I got notice that we can start back up tomorrow with our general education. But anyways, our first 2 weeks of attendance, we had 94%, and then we plummeted to about 88% the last 2.5 weeks because of the impact of not running buses. So, we have challenges, but the systematic approach that we have now with SI&A, with the use of A2A, and I'll talk more to this in a future slide, we've been able to systematically elevate our game so that we're not just reactive, we're actually proactive. And I won't steal any thunder now from a future slide, but you'll see how we have dramatically increased the way that we don't just communicate with parents, it's how we communicate with them. And I'll speak more to that in a future slide.
Great, thanks, Dave. We really appreciate that. I'm so happy to hear that your gen ed bus routes can get back on schedule. That is probably a huge relief for you.
Huge relief.
Yes. So let's talk about some data. So I think that, data is something that we talk about a lot in education, and there's different ways that we can get data, but really what is the purpose of looking at data? And really it's to have it tell you a story of what in this example attendance looks like at your district, but it's to help make action or take action and make decisions and implement things to make improvement. So this data though kind of speaks to the shift that we're seeing around attendance in education. So this is Sierra Sands data through the SI&A platform of attendance pre-COVID. So in the 18-19 school year. As you can see, the green, the blue one on the right, and the purple, those are basically kids who are the majority of the district, really just they're not missing that much school. Just a small fraction of students, about 11%, are chronically absent, which is really great. I think it was below the state average at the time, which I think is really awesome. But when we transitioned to what COVID and the whole pandemic environment created was a real shift. And now we have, almost 40% of kids chronically absent, and many reasons why. Obviously, we had to be respectful of illness and had to be caution on the side of safety. And so when I look at this, and I'm sure Dave or Tony can talk to this too. When I look at this, I think we have a major shift in habits here. That how are we going to get this back? There's just so much that goes on in my head. I'd love to hear, Tony, if you have any context you want to add, and you're muted, so don't forget.
So there are a couple things. When you look at the shift, this is pretty common. The state was at 68%, satisfactory or excellent, prior to the pandemic. It's dropped under half to 48%. You can see Sierra Sands is a little bit below that, but they are lower actually, even at 30%, 31% with the chronic and severe. Many districts are over 40% at every single grade level, and quite a few cross the 50% chronic and severe. And that's a really important thing to understand, because the research has shown clearly students who drop out of school or fail courses, 67% of the time, that student already was a chronically absent student. There's no bigger indicator on dropouts. So when you have 40 to 50% of your students already chronic, that's a challenge. But what we don't talk about is that satisfactory and excellent is 95% attendance. What we don't talk about is once you cross double digits in absences, there is a commensurate decrease in academic achievement. You're not failing, you're not dropping out, but that B or A student is dropping to a C- or a D. And once that trend starts, it's very easy for the student to get into even more bad habits, avoiding, feeling the pressure of not being able to catch up. And so when we look at that manageable group at Sierra Sands, there are 1,500 students. 1/3 of the district is right there. If we could just get that group to have 5 fewer absences this year, many of them would move back to satisfactory, but all of them would achieve better. All of them would be moving forward. And that is a critical mass for moving an entire district forward when you have students that are motivated and focused on achievement. So I think it's really important when you go back and look at your data. Yes, you have to focus on the chronic and severe, but you also need to make sure that you're doing something with that manageable group, because that again is your focus on achievement.
Absolutely. So I think, and this might be a lead into our next slide too, but as you look at your district's numbers and you see, where do you stand? Where are your kids? These are kind of measurements that we use at SI&A, but I think, Tony, you just made an excellent point of those manageable kids, which are often kids that we don't maybe communicate with that frequently. They're in the middle. So if we focus on those kids in the middle, we can really change that, those habits for them, but then academically, we can see some really big gains. I think that was.
And this is not new science. I mean, there was the whole caught in the middle trend that we talked about and all of that back in the 90s. So this is really going back to what we know works.
Absolutely.
And so this is a perfect time before we jump into a couple of the summaries. Do we have the results from our first survey question?
Yes, I think we can pull those up. All right, so I hope everyone sees them because I see them. So your LEA ADA improvement goals, we have a pretty consistent across the board between 0.5% and up to 3%. So that's pretty in line with what I've been hearing across the state. Very interesting data.
And I would just jump in. I think that is a very wise move for districts that were down in the 89% to project to get back to 95 in 1 year is a lift that would end up having you have to explain why you didn't make your revenue projections at the end of the year. So that is a very good open piece.
Absolutely.
And do we have our second question too, real quick?
I think we can, yes, here we go. All right, so we have half of our attendees are experiencing declining enrollment, and then 40% are about flat. So not too many of us getting those increase in kids.
So in an ADA funded state, every student that doesn't stay enrolled is a full ADA loss. So you have to kind of recognize that as your first baseline point, then build from there. And as you take a look at everything that's going on, we know the state was at 68%. We're going to leave these for everyone as a takeaway. But part of the conversation you really should have is, where is your LEA? And how do you know? And then have you figured out which students by name, by site, have made the biggest moves on the negative or the positive during that time. And I think this is an important piece for everyone to remember. If you want to have 95% ADA, that would mean 100% of your students have to be satisfactory or excellent. For every student that is not, you're going to have a student move closer to excellent. And remember, there's only 9 days inside that satisfactory and excellent. So when you start doing the law of averages, every chronic student by definition is going to drop that average below 95% slightly. So it's very important to do that. And so we're going to talk a lot about how much of your work is preventative versus how much is reactive and focused on remediation. So how much is proactive and how much is remediation? And when you look at your budget, that's going to be one of the questions we'll ask as we move forward.
Absolutely. So let's dive down to like the next level of data. And we're going to talk about Sierra Sands a little bit more. I appreciate Dave, you letting us, focus on your district. We can't just look at data as a whole at such a big 30,000 level view. We really need to dive into it. And so this report here is showing over the last 4 years, chronic absenteeism rates by grade. And so this really helps us see those trends. And those trends are definitely interesting, to say the least. We're seeing huge spikes at the elementary grades. I think people are seeing that universally, at least from what I've heard. But really just significantly high numbers across the board. The darkest blue bar on the right is the last school year, most recent.
And there's two really important takeaways from this. If you take a look at Sierra Sands, they're following also a state trend. The 6th, 7th, and 8th graders that never had a middle school experience. This year's 9th graders are last year's 8th graders. Last time they were in regular school, they were with one teacher, one class. When they missed a day, it was fairly easy to make it up. They're walking into 9th grade now, where you miss one day, it seems like you've missed a month, with teachers that are moving very fast. And we know this. If a 9th grader fails 3 classes, just 3, they cannot graduate on time without taking an intervention or doing something extra to move on. So from the secondary level, it's really important to dial in on your 9th and 10th graders on their attendance habits early before they get too far lost. Secondly, you look at this year's 3rd graders. They have developed much different habits on attendance. This is the benchmark year for literacy. We already have seen the most recent scores for 9-year-olds, which we know dropped, but we also know the most resilient group for lost learning is our youngest students. So while it is a concern they don't have the habits, if you get them to attend, you can rebuild that foundation fairly quickly with them. You don't have to do more. You just have to do the right foundational pieces with them. And it starts with being there every day.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Just looking at the trends by focusing on ethnic groups, we're seeing huge increases in absenteeism across the board here. I think, Tony, we were talking about this earlier, but the kind of grayed out bar, that was the 2021 year. A lot of us might have been in a virtual learning environment for part or all that school year. We saw our Black students really challenged and disengaged during that time, and we haven't recouped any of those gains or any of those losses yet. We're still seeing significant disengagement from that group of kids and other groups as well. And I think that this is another opportunity for us, when we're talking about equity. Attendance is universal, and it can really help all groups of kids improve academically just by showing up and getting that tier 1 instruction from their teachers. So I think, what a lot of our districts are trying to be more equitable. And I think attendance is an excellent way to do that and take action on that. And then we talk about learning time. Nobody likes the phrase learning loss. I think we're all fatigued with that phase. So we want to talk about recovering learning. But when we look at the average student who's missing school compared to the chronically absent student, how many hours they are missing, it's obviously a significant gap, but even our average students are missing more school than they should be.
And so if you take a look at that, I take your eyes to the right side of the chart, your high school students, your 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. Sierra Sands had excellent results for 12th graders. Across the state, we saw the average 12th grader jumping into the 25-30 absence range. And Sierra Sands, while it is high at 101 hours, which is close to 15, 16 days, it still is lower than others. So there was a focus, but you take a look at your 10th and 11th grade, they almost missed, the average student almost missed 18, 19 days. You almost have your average student at the chronic levels. So when you take a look at these numbers here, you want to have your average, the students that are on focus, well below 60 hours, so that you can put your resources that you do have towards those students that are trending much higher. And so this is another one of the takeaways that we brought for you. And again, knowing that 40% of students are chronically absent, the question is, how are you going to go back and focus on it? And then the cost of manageable. Really take a look when you go back at your district. How much are you spending on remediation? How much of your budget is going to fix issues that weren't resolved the first time? I think back to my first day as a substitute teacher. It was 1990, and I got assigned as a long-term assignment on day one to high school algebra for seniors. Back then, the graduation standards were a little different, and these students needed algebra to graduate. They had had 4 teachers in the first semester. I walked in on January 3rd, and I remember the only thing I said, besides being overwhelmed and not sure what I was going to do, was I looked them in the face and I said, if you come to school every day, I won't let you fail. And that's been my mindset all the way through. So the question number 3 is, how do you communicate with students on attendance? What are you doing to help them see the value of it? And then how do you view the student attendance data as part of your academic goals? Dave talked about, they're now talking about that each meeting. How are we making that one of our metrics?
And I'll add, if you don't mind, Tony and Jessica. So one of the things, I think we have to be fair to ourselves. One of the things is that we should anticipate at some level there will be an automatic improvement with attendance, because prior to pandemic, we almost would get in trouble sometimes. We would tell a parent, your student needs to come to school. Unless your student's bleeding or has a horrible fever, you need to be in school. And you all know those conversations, those of us who've been assistant principal or principal in a school. Well, of course, that script was flipped, right? I mean, we went from imploring students to be in school even with the sniffles and a cough to whoa, if there's any hints of you not feeling well, then you stay home. And then of course we had these real standardized periods, duration of time that you had to be gone. And so of course that has a big impact on some of the data you're seeing for Sierra Sands and in your district. But I also, having said that, want to kind of pile on a little bit to what Tony has been mentioning, and that's where I want to sort of emphasize my role in here is, I was a little bit reluctant initially, going back pre-pandemic, to getting too many modules going or paying for services that I thought we could handle internally. But what I realized through the pandemic and shortly thereafter was, we in Sierra Sands, we do not have the ability to differentiate and tailor the messaging. For those of us who are on this call or this webinar who remember back, No Child Left Behind, when we did the STAR testing back in early 2000, and for several years we had the proficient, the basic, the below basic, the far below basic. And for those of us who are striving to reach that grand 800 API index, we knew that we had to dig down And we need to be able to communicate with students who are in various spots of being basic or below basic. And we knew that we couldn't just generally strategize for kids to improve. We needed to know how close were they on the scaled score to moving from one band to the other, and how could we move. I feel like the same kind of rigor and the same kind of systematic, high level collaborative approach needs to happen in school districts, and we're on that path now. I'm not saying we've perfected it. I'm just saying that with A2A, we now have a lot more systematic capacity. And we're able to, and in one more slide down the road, I'll be able to show a little bit more specifically, but how we're able to sort of tailor our messaging depending on whether there are students in the chronic grouping or the manageable grouping, as Tony mentioned. You have to know where your students are so you can communicate effectively with them, because a one size fits all communication, which is frankly kind of where we were pre-pandemic, might have been kind of good enough back then, but it's not good enough anymore.
I appreciate you pointing that out, Dave, and no hard feelings that you might have been reluctant, 4 or 5 years ago. Don't worry about it. So data is really important to us, as you can tell, but really, I think an opportunity to just reflect for a second. A lot of us are treating attendance as a lagging indicator. It's something that we react to, and we've kind of mentioned that already. But treat attendance as a leading indicator. Look at your attendance, and that will tell you, where you need to take action proactively. And I think that this report for CBOs is one that can really help them. Tony, I'd love to get your 2 cents on how CBOs might like this type of report.
So when you look at this is giving you real-time data to what is happening now. Normally in the past, I would get the monthly reports and then really wouldn't make any conversational decisions until P1 came, which was December. But here, I'm able to see what is happening on a daily basis. Within the first month, I can look at, are we having more absences or fewer absences? And districts that have SI&A, they can look at this at a school level, or they can look at it for the district. It helps when you're building your master calendar to look at, are there trends from previous years? But it also helps you to recognize if something changes societally or behavior-wise, you may need to change your messaging, and you may need to get some additional focus out before that shift happens. Obviously, for Dave, some of his days went yellow when the buses couldn't run. And there's not much you can do there except change the messaging to explain to the students and parents how you're going to mitigate that. But when you don't have a bus issue and all of a sudden you start to see yellow and you're not sure what, that allows you to have a conversation. It allows your educators to really look at and talk with your classroom teachers. What are you seeing? And react now, or build up a proactive place for the future so that you're already messaging what might occur before it does.
Absolutely. And man, time is flying by, and we're going to keep everyone on time today. But I think that as we get back to this school year, this whole theme of this is communicating and talking to parents. And when you have a system in place like what SI&A can provide to Sierra Sands and other districts, is ensuring that conversations are happening with parents. We have got to get back to figuring out the barriers to preventing kids from coming to school and working with families to get them to come back. And some of that is through things like, we call them SART conferences. We can really learn a lot by looking at the data and the impact of conferencing. And our goal is to have as many of those that we need to every year. So Tony, I know you wanted to speak to this.
Yeah. So the idea of doing a conference is you are trying to change behavior. You are trying to have a conversation, understand what is happening with that student that's having them not come to school. If it's a younger student, it's more of the parents because they dictate whether a third grader is coming. If it's a high schooler, it's going to be a different conversation about their motivations. These results, while they're better after the conferences, are not what you're looking for because you still have an attendance problem. What we're trying to do is reinforce the behavior in a positive way. And if you go to the next slide, this is the type of result you're looking to see, where when you have that intervention, you start to actually change behavior. And as we go into the next slide, behavior, it's just like teaching. We have to remember in teaching, there's the forgetting curve from Herman Eberhaus in the late 1800s. Well, with the forgetting curve, what it talked about is you have your original learning. As soon as you finish that unit, what you're now looking at is students that are going to start a slow decline to where they're no longer going to retain that concept. This is why teachers spiral. And when you do that first review, you can take a look. It instantly brings the curve back up, but then the curve starts to drop again. So they do it again, maybe another week later. And then they do it a third time, and you can see you flattened that trajectory because it's become embedded. We know in marketing, they really talk about, to get brand awareness, it takes between 6 and 20 impressions, but then you need to sustain it. And so psychology today has talked about the same thing here. If you're not continually reinforcing the behavior, what's going to happen is people are going to fall back to their old habits. It's just like a diet. It's just like exercise. You have to every day get up and do it. And the same thing with attendance. Once you get the student back, you can't just stop talking to them about the importance of attendance. You have to continue it ongoing on a regular basis. Marketing companies know that they need to continue to get that brand out in front of you once a month, at minimum, after they've got brand awareness. And you think about your life, if you don't see something, you'll change. Maybe you went to McDonald's every single day because there's a McDonald's around the block from where you lived. But as soon as you moved and there was no McDonald's on your route home, all of a sudden that went away. You weren't having that reinforcement. It's a silly example, but it really does fit into what we're talking about on attendance behaviors.
Absolutely. That's a really relevant example. Just plug in Starbucks for a lot of things.
Exactly. So you really look at, how are you doing your conferencing? Is it negative? David talked about the fact that some of our messaging was almost so negative that we could turn off the family. How can you use that opportunity to redirect the student back to the benefits of attendance? And the only way you can do that is if you've added additional communication about the benefits of attendance before the student misses out. And so the question I would ask for everybody is, how much of your communication is preventative, talking about what we want to have as outcomes, and how much is reactive? If we go to the next slide, this is what I'm talking about. When we start the year, we want to increase learning time. We want to have improved graduation rates. We have to reduce dropout rates. All of these things, all of those examples will happen if you focus on attendance. And if you focus on attendance for every student, the challenge that we have is districts that do it on their own, they're sending letters only to the kids that are missing school and are moving into chronic. SI&A for many years focused on manageable kids that were close to chronic. And then we also made a shift. And we recognized that we had to talk to every single student all the way through to reinforce those habits. And once we did that change, it really did help being proactive. So now our reactive focus is on a smaller group of students. And Jessica's going to talk about what this looks like and how you can go out today and change the culture of your district very simply.
Absolutely. So really just thinking about what's necessary. You know, what SI&A has been doing this for a really long time. We've figured out, you know, what's working. And when we talk about, you know, how to make attendance a priority, it starts with having a process in place and having strong fundamental blocking and tackling. You know, Dave mentioned earlier the challenges with staffing. I mean, I think we're all experiencing in some capacity challenges regarding to staffing. So when we're trying to make attendance a priority, we can't rely solely on personnel. You know, there needs to be some systems in place, and those systems need to be rigorous. They need to be consistent across all of our campuses. They need to have reinforcements built in place. They need to have that structure so that something as important as attendance isn't falling to the wayside when an emergency happens or some other fire that we need to put out happens. And I mean, that's what our solution is really designed to do. And, you know, it has the data, that measurement and oversight as well, to really make sure that you know which kids need that additional support, because some students do.
Yeah, what I really love about SI&A's approach is it's a long-term partnership. We've seen a lot of transition, not just staffing shortages, but we've seen leadership transition. And every time there's a transition, the leader's going to spend their time listening and learning, and you stop doing the day-to-day work while you're learning that new culture. So having a system in place is the greatest gift current leaders can give to their district, is maintaining a stable focus on attendance that will outlive each of the leaders in their tenure, and the next leader will be able to inherit that culture. So getting that systems approach is absolutely critical, both when you don't have enough staff and when you have transition of staff.
Appreciate that. Absolutely. So when we focus on attendance, we take a multi-tiered approach. And I know that when Dave's district partnered with us, you know, they started with the foundation tier 1. And I know that Dave, just in your 4 years, I think we implemented this when you became superintendent, actually.
Correct. Yeah. So if you look down at that, you know, that bar, that tier 1 universal interventions, you know, that is just a whole host of tailored, nuanced, you know, focused ways and different ways that we can communicate with students and their families, depending on how they're performing in attendance. You know, we look at the staff recognition program. You know, I would have never conceived of doing something like this, but through the SI&A partnership, we actually had at our board meeting just a few months ago at the end of last school year, we had a really nice staff recognition program where some plaques were handed out to some principals who had been taking lead on some of the work and helping mentor some of our newer principals, and just identifying places where attendance has been improving at the highest rate, et cetera. But then you can see on the bottom of your screen just all the types of different ways that we communicate. And then I think you'll be impressed in a few more slides when you see actually the numbers of those, and you'll see that in specific in a little bit.
Absolutely.
So messaging cannot be the same to every student. That's the other piece. Elementary students, their focus and our focus is on getting that proficiency by 3rd grade. At middle school, we're trying to get them that transition to go to a content-driven schedule. High schools, we're really trying to get them focused on what is it going to take to graduate, what is your career pathway, and then obviously college and career follow. So part of what we really need to look at, and when you're doing messaging and when you're trying to be proactive, is you have to be different based on the audience. And sometimes even within the grade span, the chronic students may need additional messaging. And so what we've learned is that districts cannot spend all day putting all these proactive pieces out. They need help so that they can continue their focus on teaching and learning and keeping the students focused. And so that's what we're really talking about on tier 2 and tier 3, is getting into really targeted focus.
Absolutely. Perfect segue. I mean, you know, what we have done differently and really have noticed at SI&A, what works is communicating in different ways, being more proactive about informing parents of the importance of attendance, recognizing positive behaviors in students, and encouraging students who may be at the cusp of a struggle or who are struggling. And when we look about the work we've done with Sierra Sands Unified, I want to point out in the bottom left-hand corner, in 2021, 5,000 communications were sent out to families in the district about attendance. And in 21-22, 38,000 communication pieces were sent to parents and students about attendance. And those were not just reaction based letters. Those were proactive, engaging pieces. So Dave, I'd love to hear the reaction you've seen and from your team and and your community on these issues.
Yeah, well, sometimes what's impactful in the reaction is sometimes a lack of reaction. And what I mean by that, a little bit tongue in cheek. Of course, we get reaction. There's been a lot of positive reaction, but sometimes it's what you don't get too. We've seen a reduction in, any of the antagonistic or misunderstanding that can happen, or the tension, maybe that's the right word, the tension that can happen between parent or guardian and the school site. When you're able to build a more robust pipeline of communication between the parent and actually communicate with more parents than you did before, because you're either affirming or you're nudging, and you're not reacting with that strong, progression towards SARB. So I just want to highlight that it's been positive, but what's just as important is, a reduction in the negative, a reduction in the tension, which of course elevates trust, it builds rapport, and it just helps develop the right mindset for attendance, which, both Jessica and Tony have talked extensively about the direct benefits of students being in the seat. And that's what we're all about.
Absolutely.
So when you look at it, tier 2, there's research behind it. When you do tier 2 targeted messaging, where this was occurring monthly or quarterly at 57,000 K-3 students, their baseline when they started, 35% of them were chronically absent. 49% of them had a truancy event. The first year, there was a dramatic change in the chronic, not so much on the excused absences until the 4th year. And that's the real important takeaway from this. It's not a 1 year and done focus. You've got to be doing it each year. But what you saw is chronic absenteeism from that K-3 group dropped from 35% down to 3%. Your excessive excused absences, the folks that are taking extended vacations and doing other pieces, dropped from almost 50% down to 14%. That is the power of doing proactive messaging. But if you're not ready to do proactive messaging, on the next slide, here's the power of doing 7 years of tier 1 consistent at high school. And when you talk about an equity lever, this is 130,000 students. We looked at the graduation rates by ethnicity from year 1 to year 7, and the results are tremendous. What you see is that the achievement gap that started was significantly closed for students of color. African Americans moving from 73% to 85%, because 7 consecutive years, they were getting all of the tier 1 messages focusing on, hey, you're starting to slip, good conferencing, good reinforcement. When you put an emphasis on attendance, you get results.
Exactly. So obviously we have a lot we've talked about a lot of things today, and I think wrapping it up, we really need to, as CBOs and as leaders of our district, we really have a lot of things to kind of take back to our district. We need to look at our attendance data, and we need to break it up, and we need to see who are the students that are in that manageable group that we can move to be satisfactory or excellent, because that is, I think, where a lot of our gains can be made. We need to establish good attendance habits, and especially in the early grades, but really with everyone, reinforcing those habits, reinforcing the message about coming to school and how important it is for your learning. We recommend, 6 to 20 impressions throughout the year to really start changing those habits. Some states are, especially in California, they're offering and giving lots of money to help get kids back to learning and get them back up to speed. Great opportunities for CBOs to take advantage of those funding to invest a little bit and see those ADA gains, for that to become part of your budget firewall. I'm sure Tony has something to add.
And I think that's probably the biggest thing. We do need a sense of urgency. We know that everyone is looking to us, whether you're in California where ADA is going to drive revenue, or you are in North Carolina or somewhere else across the nation where it's about academic achievement. We have an opportunity right now to change those behaviors and begin a positive trend. The fact that there is one-time money makes it even better because you can make that significant investment right at the beginning. And it doesn't take much to pay for it. To give you an idea, 10,000 student district could do one message a month, every single month. And they would only need to have their total ADA improved by 17. 17 students, you could message 10,000 students and send 100,000 positive messages for 17 ADA. So when you start looking at it, the question that I think everyone needs to look at is, how much do we spend on remediation for students that have failed because they were not attending? And how much are we willing to invest to get those outcomes that we're really looking at? We're here to help you at SI&A. If you don't call us, you still should be asking these questions and really putting your focus there. But if you do call us, we absolutely can help you make that change.